what's really been interesting and instrumental for us as we started the initiative and started to identify a framework and an understanding was to really help people identify what is a wellness destination tourism and what makes that up. Because there's a lot of confusion out there with, I have a spa and it's in a hotel, therefore I'm a wellness destination. And for us, it goes much beyond that.
Welcome to Truth Behind Travel Podcast. I'm Dolores Semeraro, and this is my weekly show where tourism, travel, and hospitality industry professionals meet to discuss and share marketing strategies as they reshape the future of travel. If you want to learn the truth directly from the leaders and the doers of this industry, you are in the right place. Before you dive into today's episode, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app. And while you're on it, go on and follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Truth Behind Travel Podcast. Hello, I'm your podcast host, Dolores Semeraro, and today we're diving in what truly means for a destination to tap into its wellness potentials. And this is not just by opening a couple of spas or offering retreats or detox programs, but to deeply look into what wellness encompasses from a social, environmental, and financial perspective. My guest today is a returning voice to the podcast and an expert and an authority in her field. She joined me on Truth Behind Travel Podcast not long ago for an episode which was number 47 of season 2, dedicated to her entrepreneurial endeavor, the founding of Meraki Bespoke Wellness Strategies, and her mission to put her expertise at the services of the hospitality industry and the tourism destinations, to explore in a more mindful way, supported by facts and data, their wellness potentials and market opportunities. Today she comes back wearing the hat of Vice Chair of Wellness Tourism Initiative on Wellness Tourism Destinations under the Global Wellness Institute, where she passionately collaborates with a team of researchers to foster a deeper and greater understanding of the global wellness traveler, with their values and therefore the opportunities for the industry, and lead these findings to a practical integration into wellness marketing and operational strategies. Join me as I welcome back to Truth Behind Travel Podcast, Lindsay Madden-Nadeau. Welcome back to the show and welcome back to a very special episode today. You know how much I love having great podcast guests that bring value to the conversations we're having on the podcast. But there's something I love even more, and that's when a great podcast guest comes back to the show to add even more action-oriented, really down to the ground, what has been done since the last conversation we've had, and share that with the podcast audience. So I'm very pleased to welcome back to the show, Lindsay Madden-Nadeau. Welcome back, Lindsay. I'm so happy to have you back.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
I know we spoke last time about the Meraki Bespoke Wellness Strategies, for which you are the founder, and all the activities and the purpose and values really of what led you to really work towards a complete different lifestyle and really look into what was your personal mission when it comes to bring professionalism and really bring that work into the hospitality wellness. You have an amazing background that has brought you from corporate into this entrepreneurial journey with Meraki. Today, you're back on the podcast to share more about a parallel initiative, a parallel work of passion that you've been carrying on, a work that deserves to be discussed, deserves to shine because it brings so much more value to destinations around the world. And that is the aspect of tapping into their wellness potentials. Today, we're going to talk about the work that you do as a vice chair of the Wellness Destination Tourism Initiative as part of the Global Wellness Institute.
Well, I'll start off with saying that the Global Wellness Institute is really the leading voice of wellness in the industry. That's where a lot of the statistics and industry experts, I would say, sit within a very credible form. And the Global Wellness Institute, really what their duty is to bring us the latest and greatest within the wellness, health, and well-being sphere, helping people to identify and define what the new trends are. And as part of one of their arms is they have this list of initiatives, and there's probably over 20 initiatives on the Global Wellness Institute's webpage. Our Wellness Destination Tourism Initiative is just one of them. And myself, along with Catherine Droga, who's our chair, we have a team of about 5 to 6 people. It's a voluntary basis, and it's all dedicated to research that we do on identifying what makes a great wellness destination. And what's really been interesting and instrumental for us as we started the initiative and started to identify a framework and an understanding was to really help people identify what is a wellness destination tourism and what makes that up. Because there's a lot of confusion out there with, I have a spa and it's in a hotel, therefore I'm a wellness destination. And for us, it goes much beyond that. It goes beyond the hospitality industry and just one asset and more at a tourism destination level. So the objectives behind this initiative that we're working on is really, we know that wellness tourism is such a fast growing industry, probably one of the most highest consumer demands out there right now. And that can be broken down into many different categories. But we want to understand, what are these destinations doing? Like, what are their strategies? And how are they leading these strategies? And then we really dig into what the global wellness traveler persona is. So we get into aspects of what makes a primary wellness traveler, what makes a secondary wellness traveler. So what was really interesting is a project that I was working on right now within the sustainable regenerative tourism space. And we had it's outside of the initiative, and we had some research done. And they were able to identify, from a wellness traveler perspective, 6 different communities, and focusing in on 3 of those that came up that were, we were talking earlier about, what does that traveler persona look like? One of them was the 360 optimists, one of them was the wellness protagonist, and one of them was the eco supers. And so these were the top 3 kind of driving communities and what they were looking for. And you can see out of 6 of them, 2 of them were dedicated to wellness and to eco-sustainability tourism. And it was really interesting to peel back the layers of what their likes, desires, the brands that they already follow. This was all AI driven research. And, their attraction to health, fitness, wearables, technology, sustainable skincare brands, sustainable brands in general, the brands that they follow, people like Deepak Chopra, Ayurveda was a philosophy that they were very much driven to, that key driver of physical, mental well-being. This is really how we begin to define what is a primary wellness traveler versus someone who's just traveling for enjoyment, lifestyle, family vacation, and would like to enjoy some wellness while they're on there. So what we're seeing on the market too is that, aside from building wellness destination tourism, that we have a lot of eco-sustainable brands that are also being built, like the Equinox Hotel, in New York City. I'm not sure if you've seen that, but, it started off as a fitness membership, and it's now grown to be, it's growing to be a hospitality brand. So there's a lot of disruptors in the market that are disrupting hospitality, but are able to help shape some of these wellness traveler demands. So as an example to that, a primary wellness traveler is really someone who's their first and foremost reason for traveling is not just for relaxation and health, but it's more on a medical, health, wellness, spirituality, where they're literally just going away to book a detox or, a mindfulness retreat, or they're going for medical diagnostics. Whereas a secondary wellness traveler would be going around traveling around, and that might be one of your legacy hospitality brands that we see, or an independent operator where they're going and, they'd like to incorporate wellness as part of their vacation, whether that's hiking or, cycling, or it could be eating healthy food or doing some mindfulness stuff, or going to a spa and relaxing. But maybe they also want to have a glass of wine, and there's something about a balance. So, they could be there with their family, they could be there with their friends. And so we aim to identify the difference and communicate that. What is a primary wellness traveler and what is a secondary wellness traveler? And then, of course, the last thing that we look at within the initiative is really, what is the value of becoming a wellness destination? Not from an asset level, but from a tourism perspective. So those are really, that's a quick summary of what we try to gain when we're looking for, or we're trying to shape this wellness destination and helping define it at a greater level.
There's something about the core purpose of the initiative that aligns very much so with the work that you do, what you personally do in your line of work with Meraki. How did that connect happen? What made you join forces with the research team of the initiative?
Well, I feel like I'm one of those really lucky people where my work is a passion for me. And so I would consider myself as a primary wellness traveler. Even when I travel for work, if I'm going to a city or I'm going on vacation, it's usually geared around wellness. And so I already have a deep passion and understanding for that and what that traveler is looking for. On top of that, I have a personal interest in sustainability and regenerative tourism, which is a really big part of that definition of a wellness destination tourism. So marrying all of those together, that just made it a really perfect fit. And so the more I, supported the initiative and the more research that I did, the more, it just evolved. And that always brings me, great passion behind the work that I do. And it's also a lot of learnings that I can bring to future clients or projects that I'm working on to, help define and shape different strategies that can support those projects as they grow.
The goals of the initiative per se that uses research, they through the research, they aim at providing a set of very important information. Like these are informations and that comes these findings from the research that you elaborate and you put at the service of those destinations who are willing to learn, who are willing to even to question themselves in their authenticity, in their integrity. Are we really a wellness destination or are we not?
So I think what's really relevant to start the conversation off with is, how do we, within our initiative, define what a wellness destination is? And for us, again, it's not about one asset. It's not about a set of assets. It's really going beyond that. So it's a community, it's a region, or it's a country that are really leading the way in wellness tourism. And in order for us to identify that and create a framework that was consistent, the team went out to research, first of all, what are these destinations that we think are known for wellness destination tourism? And what is consistent among all of them that really, are leading strategies for them? So we put together a set of values, then we put together, a framework where we're really digging into the traveler's needs versus what that experience looks like. That was really interesting for us. And after that, we started doing case studies, which was really the fun bit, because we would do the initial research at the desk research and identify what countries we thought were great. And then we would go out and, we had a series of different questions from a visitor perspective, from an environmental perspective, from a social perspective, and from an economic perspective. We would ask different questions that would give us information to help, confirm why and how that was a wellness destination. Each of these destinations, whether it was a country, region, community of people, there was an accountability. And a lot of that accountability came through culture and community and environment. There were three things that across the board, when we started to look at the very successful models of a wellness destination, those were three components: culture, community, environment, that were very strong, either policy led or just culturally and like naturally coming from the culture or heritage of the land. Those were three components. Also, there was this commitment to want to do better, this consistency, but also this operating with transparency and communicating with transparency. What we also found was there is this leadership. So there was a general motivation to make a change for good. And through that could have been through innovation, it could have been through technology, but they really genuinely wanted to be leaders in this space. It wasn't just about saying, oh, well, we need to now be sustainable or we need to be regenerative. It was actually the exact opposite. It's like, we want to lead the way in this. And another one was authentic, how can they remain authentic to their culture, to their roots, and to their heritage? Much in alignment with leadership, there was this desire for impact, so this force for good within the travel and tourism industry. That was backed up by different metrics that they would use to measure their success. They wanted to measure the change that they were implementing. And ESG, so the environmental, social, and governance, was actually a best practice that we saw across all of them. Sustainability and well-being were also, components of that. And within the well-being, that social framework, so those basic fundamentals in life of education, healthcare, were things that consistently came up within these as values behind the destination. And they were either culturally driven, they were community driven, or they were driven by environmental factors.
Do you think that today, as we already, navigate since quite a while now, but we do navigate the post-pandemic world where a lot of destinations have suffered from lack of tourism and somehow had a moment to sort of rewind and rethink their approach. In many cases, if there is a case where a destination has approached the desire of tapping into their wellness potential, why would a destination do so today? If we look at type of traveling preferences, traveling priorities. So as things are now, as things progress in the tourism industry, why would a destination tap into his wellness potential? Why that side? Why going that way?
Well, I think it's an interesting question. And I think, from the research that we've done and what our framework that we build has told us is that, that environmental, sustainable, and governance is key. And it's almost like a juggling act, that if you push one naturally falls into the other, and they seem to influence one another. So when we started looking into the environmental aspects of why would we want to be more environmentally sustainable, or why would we want to do protection of our land or conservation, and this came with an added responsibility. So already within these cultures, they had this desire to want to do good and to become a force for good. It was already built up in their either community or their cultural traditions, and so environmental was something that served as, we know that we're doing good for ourselves, but we're also doing good for the planet. And that was going to attract a certain type of tourism, more of a conscious traveler, right? Then you look into the social governance, and we look at community projects. And when we get into some of the case studies, we'll be able to give you examples of how some of those countries or regions or communities are giving back to different community projects. Social also is, it's culture, it's heritage, but it's also this quality of life, the education, healthcare. We know that that's fundamental. And so social is a really big component of that. And then there's governance. So technology, that's long-term economic changes, it's strategies to attract foreign investment. And each of those, like I said, they really influence the other. So the overall goal is to, from a governance perspective, but by influencing the environmental and the social aspects of it, it automatically influences the governance category.
It's interesting that we observed sort of a big comeback into many destinations that were very quiet on this specific topic after tourism sort of bounced back to okay level. I wouldn't say that it's already back to the levels that we were having before the pandemic, but at the same time, we realized that we observed that some destinations were putting forward a communication strategy around being a wellness destination based on the activities of the private sector rather than the framework and the infrastructures of the public sector of the country per se. And this is, I think, one of the big disconnect, one of the biggest misunderstanding when we speak of wellness tourism. When the wellness tourism is led by the private sector, which means which people think of hotels with a beautiful spa or a retreat program or a detox program, when instead is the destination that enables a certain type of travel, there's so much more to the perception of a wellness destination than just the activities of the private sector. And thanks to the research and the findings that you conducted, and you put together a set of case studies that really enabled you to see and to really sort of unveil who does what, why, and where are the common traits that we can identify when it comes to activities that are meant to position the destination as a wellness destination. What I love about case studies is that they bring an element of reality to the conversation. They bring you back to the ground, saying this is really happening in this country, and this is what we can learn from it. What are the case studies that you can share with us today?
What we found out about these case studies was that not all of them excelled in just one area. Some of them would excel in multiple areas. Some of them would just be leading the way in one of them. So it wasn't like they ticked the boxes in every single one, but it was really about looking at these different case studies and understanding, what are the key learnings and what are the key opportunities that came from each of them. So we looked at countries like Costa Rica, Bhutan, Bali. We looked at Denmark, I actually personally looked at Denmark. It was really interesting because Denmark as a whole, they've got very strong social systems. They pay a lot of taxes, but they're also very happy to pay a lot of taxes because they get a lot from that. And you look at some of these Nordic countries where they're very high on the environmental, but actually, by March, they've used up their year's supply and most of that is because of their export, right? So they're very high on their environmental policy, some of these places, but actually because of the export of some of their natural resources, that actually puts them at the bottom of the pile. So we looked at the Nordic countries. We looked at new emerging markets like Saudi Arabia, where sustainability and regenerative tourism is really key. There's Australia, which has already got an existing footprint there. We looked at different blue zones in the world like Japan. One of the most interesting ones from a community perspective that was built on a resilience strategy. So it started off as a resilience strategy. It was with Adelaide Hills in southern Australia. And it was after the devastation of the 2019 bushfires that had basically devastated a lot of their natural resources. And this resilience strategy was not just from an environmental perspective, but it was also from a people perspective, is how can we rebuild this community again? And so one of their strongest strengths was about, this initial engagement with community. And that's something that we do see across the board, even from a sustainability leadership perspective. If we're doing new developments, that initial engagement with community is fundamental to the success of the strategy that you're leading or to the success of the project that you're working on. A lot of times it's the last thing that people will think of, but it actually becomes the most predominant and most successful initiative. And within this initiative, they focused on their existing landscapes versus the existing assets that they had. They also engaged with governments and states. So there was this community government state collaboration where they came together and worked together on what this resilience strategy was. They put together some clear metrics. They knew that sustainability was an opportunity for them, so they used this as an opportunity to rebuild that. All in all, what they were able to do was rebuild a wellness community to focus on their existing assets like the hiking in the mountains and add those sustainability elements. And then they had a community of existing wellness operators within Adelaide Hills. And what they did is they understood what they had and what they needed. And then they started plugging in more of a purpose-built approach to those wellness businesses. So it was there attracting a wellness destination traveler, either on a primary or a secondary level. And then from there, they were able to build on festivals and events, and it became naturally a wellness destination. So this is a really great example of a small community that was able to use a rather devastating tragedy to rebuild wellness destination tourism as part of their strategy. So there's 3 countries here, all on different areas of the planet. Bali, which is it's an island, but also we could narrow that in on the community of Ubud, which is known to many as, a wellness destination. It's where people go to grow, they go to heal. There's this accessibility to lifestyle, to healthy eating. And what I personally love most about Bali is, you come into the community and the community they just welcome you automatically. And it's in a very organic, natural way. It's in a way that it just feels so welcoming to be there. And there's not too many communities in the world that can do that really, really well. But with Bali, it really comes with Ubud in particular. It's a spirit of their culture. And so there's this cultural pull towards, wellness. If we look at their traditional medicinal practices, and their approach to health and well-being, it's very natural. It's built on mindfulness, it's spirituality, and so it's naturally able to build and attract that type of traveler. Environmentally, we found that Bali, there was definitely some opportunity there. So it was very strong on the cultural values and taking care of people and building this beautiful wellness offering, but environmentally, it definitely had some opportunity. But what we did witness in Bali through our conversations was that from an international brand perspective, there was brands like Six Senses coming in, and Como Shambhala. These are international hospitality brands who were coming in with their best practices and being able to kind of lead the way in that sense. So it wasn't necessarily government led. It was the international investment that was coming in. But in order for that to happen and to be able to attract that type of traveler, of course, it has to be focused on, well, how do we get people here and how do we attract that foreign investment? So that's the economic component of it. And, Bali was one of the first countries, particularly after COVID, to really welcome in those tools for the digital nomads and getting the visas in place. And, they grow a lot of their own local produce. So they're, everything, not a lot of things need to be imported within Bali. So that was a really big strength for them too, in terms of boosting their economic output. If we look at a country like Costa Rica, there was just so many interesting things after this case study that really, I thought, gosh, maybe I should be moving there, like it ticked a lot of boxes. And, Costa Rica is one of the few countries too that has positioned themselves with a slogan of this Pura Vida. And Costa Rica it's a favorite for a lot of people. It's a growing destination. It attracts a very conscious traveler. And right now in Costa Rica, there's a 30% return rate of tourists. So they're doing something right in terms of attracting that specific type of tourism. And I would assume that Bali would probably be very similar. What we found from the Costa Rica case study was that from an environmental perspective, that was their strength. They were really, really strong. There was a lot of policies in place, rebuilding and sustaining forests, and this focus on agriculture and climate benefits. So there was very strict environment. And in the case study, actually our interviewee said, it's almost like committing a crime there. If you do something wrong with the environment, it's equivalent to, doing crime or doing time. And so environment is very heavily weighted. The way that they design their properties, it's all, you design with nature, you design around nature. Nature is basically the guide there. And that's a really beautiful approach. And I think that's why it takes on that type of tourism.
I don't see that approach being taken very often elsewhere, really, where you build around nature. You don't just build over it, which is what unfortunately happens most of the time.
It's true. And I would say Costa Rica is one of the examples of many that we have that are really leaders in that environmental policy. From an economic perspective, they have also, trying to attract foreign investments and, the digital nomads. So they have a 12-month digital nomads visa, where you don't pay tax for 1 year. So they're saying, okay, we know what our greatest strengths are, and we know what we want to attract, but how are we going to get them to either invest time or money here? And so they've set up the economic infrastructure to support that. One really interesting point with Costa Rica was in 1948, they actually eliminated the army in Costa Rica, and they took the money that would be funding the army and they actually put that towards education and health. So education in Costa Rica is actually mandatory. It's almost like an army service. You have to be educated. And part of that education is really about community and tourism and making sure that the local people understand the benefit that tourism brings to the destination and to them as a community, but also education on the natural ecosystem and the importance of that and why they protect it, why it's one of their biggest resources.
I did not know about the army reassignment of national funds and so, and it's actually something that, given the times that we're living today and this constant way too often talk of weapons and armies and employment around the world, and with what is happening, that it's quite inspiring to know this approach. Something that I should definitely bring back into the podcast, perhaps having someone from Costa Rica.
It's attracting that foreign investment are peoples whose values align with the values of the country. And so it leaves very little room for any type of misalignment there.
I know that on the podcast, there are a lot of the podcast listeners are part of tourism boards, or they are tourism board members, or they are leaders in the tourism destination management sector. And if they are to listen to this podcast and are curious to tap into this research, where they can find more of what we talked about today.
Well, all of our stuff is posted on the Global Wellness Institute's webpage. There's a tab under initiatives, which we can leave in the show notes. It will come up with all the different initiatives and all the team members, and then all the research that gets posted. So we're in the process now of putting together all the findings from our case studies, putting them into a booklet, having it online. We have our frameworks that are there. And it's a presentation that basically takes all of our research and consolidates it into a framework. And so a lot of the information that we find from that can be found on the Global Wellness Institute's webpage.
And as a first step for, I'm envisioning, for example, a tourism destination director or managing director. I know many of them are listening regularly to the podcast, and perhaps after listening to this conversation, they want to tap into some sort of auditing, for example, and contact you and the team and say, come and audit our place and tell us
what we're always looking for.
Exactly. Yes. So we leave this open invitation, right? I would love to leave space for that.
Yeah, and I think, we, like I said earlier, we recognize the fact that not every destination is going to tick all the boxes. But what's really great is that we get to share the best practice within that framework. And so we welcome, anyone who can really make a case about being a wellness destination. It's not that we have a specific audit in process, but we do have questions. So typically we'll ask the tour operator, we'll do our invitation. And then from the invitation, we would say, look, here's 5 or 6 questions. Could you answer them for us now so that we can kind of, we take one from each category, that we can start to understand where's the bulk of their expertise sitting, or where's their best practice sitting. And then we can, when we have our one-to-one interview, it's usually about 30 to 40 minutes by phone. Then we can start to really narrow in on that best practice, so that we have a variety of different case studies. And it's not all telling us the same of the same. But as you can see with, the Costa Rica, the Bhutan, and the Bali, a lot of those will start just naturally to see the same consistencies across the board. So for us, wellness destination is again, it's not about an asset level or having a couple spas in one area. It's really about building a wellness destination strategy around either a development or a destination around the world.
I feel from the conversations I'm having on the podcast and off the podcast as well, that there's this growing desire of tapping into a more truthful side of tourism. And people are more involved and more committed, either from the consumer side, from the traveler's perspective, and from the managing perspective of the tourism industry. So whether it's public sector or private sector, people are more engaged into understanding, even before having the conversations, on what is it that we need to rebuild on, what is it that we can develop further. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you for bringing even more value to the conversation we're having on the podcast. All the show notes of the episode will have access to the website and the contact details of the team that will be, the preferred ones for people to get in touch. And we leave an open invitation to all the tourism board managers that are listening to the podcast to get in touch and really tap into the potentials of their wellness of their destinations from the wellness point of view. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. And I invite anybody that wants to tap into this conversation to get in touch with you as well.
Thank you. And thanks for having me. I loved sharing all the information today.
All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you once again for joining me for this fantastic episode of Truth Behind Travel podcast. I love when a conversation evolves into practical industry insights, and it can bring value to you and your team. So do share your feedback with me with a direct message here or on social media at Truth Behind Travel Podcast. And don't forget to check out the show notes, where I'm adding all the links for you to dive into Lindsay's work at the Global Wellness Institute. I will see you soon again here for another great conversation on Truth Behind Travel Podcast. Bye for now.